Joining us now is Frank Zaccanelli.
Frank Zaccanelli.
Let's welcome Frank Zaccanelli.
Live from the Real News Studios in Dallas, Texas, welcome to the To Be Frank Show. Your host, Frank Zaccanelli, has been in the world of domestic and international business and professional sports for 40 years. And as a former minority owner, president, and general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, he's been asked to comment on current events in the national news for most of his professional career. But what he and many others are really looking for is a place to find just the facts. Welcome to the To Be Frank Show.
Live from Dallas, Texas, the To Be Frank Show on a beautiful Monday. Welcome to the To Be Frank Show, and we're glad to have you here. I am your host, Frank Zaccanelli, and I'm really excited about the growth of the show and everything that we've done. This is episode number 8, and it's actually been a lot of fun to do, and we're getting a lot of feedback from people who are actually enjoying the show, and the viewership is growing every show. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching the show. And as you know, you can get the show, the To Be Frank Show, on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we're real excited about being with you today, and we've got some interesting topics to cover. And then we have a really interesting guest. Her name is Rania Mankarious. Rania Mankarious. And I'm sorry for messing that up, but she is the CEO of Crime Stoppers in Houston and has done a fantastic job on social justice related things. And we're going to talk to her about some of those things and a few other viewpoints that she's got, because her organization has been way out in front of how policing in the neighborhood and how all of this is now, which is huge topics in the news today, coming together. And she's a real expert as it relates to it. So other than really screwing up her name, we're really happy to have Rania here today with us. I want to talk a little bit about some of the current things that are going on in the world. You know, you wake up this morning and you read in the newspaper, you read on the internet, you see on TV that 85 babies under the age of 1 year old have come down now with the coronavirus in Corpus Christi, Texas. And that was very startling to me. The reason that it's startling to me is most of the dissenters to how bad the coronavirus really is and what it is and how it is, all the political, talk that goes on both sides of the equation. One of the talking points in the whole debate is, only older people with, pre-existing conditions in nursing homes, they're the only people really that are affected by this. They're the only people dying. They're the only people that are really at risk. Now, I have said that I don't believe any of that, because what's really come, I think, to the forefront as it relates to the coronavirus around the world is we don't really know what it is yet. Even the experts in Washington and around the world will admit that they're not totally comfortable with explaining exactly what this really is and how it affects every single person and all the pieces to that. But when you look at the news and you pick up that 85 little babies have come down with the coronavirus in one county in Corpus Christi, you have to really ask yourselves, how did that happen? Well, clearly, this happened by virtue of the mother either contracting the COVID-19 during her pregnancy, or right after her pregnancy, or before her pregnancy. And these babies who are now, 2 and 3 months old, 4 months old, contracted this COVID-19. And that's the whole problem here, is that there's so many things that we don't know about. But that really struck me as something that I really wanted to mention today, because it really is incredibly disturbing. And I think that anybody who takes the position that this is just a hoax and it's going to go away and everything else, I think really needs to pay attention to the situation that everyone is vulnerable here. And so that's why we've got to work very hard at wearing our masks and social distancing and all the pieces that are necessary to try to combat this terrible pandemic. Okay, we want to start the show with a tribute to John Lewis, the congressman slash, social justice champion who passed away a few days ago. John Lewis is a really interesting guy who spent his whole life searching for social justice. He was in some ways a follower of Martin Luther King. At 15 years old, he said that he heard Dr. King's first speech. When he was 15 years old, he heard Dr. King speak, and then eventually got involved with the whole movement with Dr. King and others, and lived his whole life really trying to find a better life for all Americans. And if you really take a look today at where we are on the spectrum with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and everything else, John Lewis was a champion for doing things the right way. I'm going to read you a couple of things. He was an American politician and a civil rights leader who served in Congress for 33 years. He really gave his life to public service. And in the public service arena that he was in, a lot of his time was really around social justice related issues. He was also a keynote speaker in the 1963 March on Washington and the huge speech, in the mall. And so he really personified exactly what the whole civil rights movement was all about in the 60s under Dr. Martin Luther King. But he really, really was a champion his whole life for trying to do the right thing. John was involved in the freedom rides that challenged segregation at the bus terminals in the South. This was all part of what we talked about in a prior show about the whole Jim Crow era and some of the atrocities that kind of went along with that. John Lewis was a real champion for all of those types of causes, and spent his life really in pursuit of that. Roll the tape.
I have the pleasure to present to this great audience young John Lewis, National Chairman, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Brother John Lewis.
We march today for jobs and freedom, but we have nothing to be proud of. Hundreds and thousands of our brothers are not here, but they're receiving starvation wages or no wages at all. While we stand here, there are sharecroppers in the Delta of Mississippi who are out in the field working for less than $3 a day, 12 hours a day. While we stand here, there are students in jail on trump-up charges. Our brother James Farmer, along with many others, is also in jail. We come here today with a great sense of misgiving.
That was the speech that preceded the Martin Luther King speech in the March on Washington in 1963, I believe it was. A lot can be learned from John Lewis and his life and the way he lived it. I want to read something that he said that Martin Luther King Jr. taught him. He said, "Dr. King taught me to be hopeful, to be optimistic, to never get lost in despair, to never become bitter, and to never hate." Man, could we use those words today as a roadmap to maybe how we start to fix some of these incredible challenges that fight our country now, that are laden in the middle of our country. It's just amazing what's happened here in terms of it. But I think that John Lewis can be a shining light to how maybe we need to proceed and go forward as it relates to not only social issues in our country, but all issues in our country, all of the discord that is out there. I think we could learn a lot from John Lewis, and we hope that he is a beacon for how we might move forward as it relates to some of the issues that we face today. Our second topic is about the polls. And I don't know if anyone, even at this point, is paying attention to the polls. We're still over 100 days out. But when you take a look at the polls now in the United States, and you take a look at Trump versus Biden, Republic versus Democrats, all the stuff, some of the poll information is got to be disturbing to the Republicans and the president. And I'm going to talk specifically about what I consider to be the key numbers as it relates to this poll. Quinnipiac University poll, which is very highly regarded, conducted a poll from July 9th to July 13th. It came out Biden 52%, Trump 37%. Now, those numbers are a pretty wide gap. Again, understanding that it's early, and understanding again that a lot of people on the right side of the equation believe that the polls don't reflect, when it comes to Donald Trump, the true voting that will occur during the election because of what happened in 2016. There are some arguments to be made there. But here is the key number, as I see it. His handling of the coronavirus pandemic. 59% of the people in the poll say Biden would handle the pandemic better, and 35% of the people say that Trump would handle the pandemic better. That's a spread of 24 points. That is a gigantic spread. I mean, that is a canyon-wide spread. And if I'm in the Trump campaign, if I'm there trying to figure out, okay, how do we make up some of this margin? It clearly has to be in the area of the pandemic, which is number one, even ahead of the economy and everything else in voters' minds as they go into November. And I think when we really take a look at this, we get ourselves into a position to where the election, in my mind, is going to be based clearly and solely on how this pandemic goes over the next 3.5 months. I mean, it's just obvious to me when you look at these numbers. When you really take a look now at another poll, Fox News came out with a poll. And we're going to get into Donald Trump and Chris Wallace's interview yesterday that was widely watched. He was at on the patio behind the White House, and Chris Wallace did about a 45-minute interview with Donald Trump where they got into a significant amount of issues that we'll talk a little bit about later in the monologue. But one day ago, Fox News came out now with their poll, and they basically show Biden at 49% and Trump at 41%. So there's an 8-point gap. I don't think that there's any debate that Donald Trump is behind in this election. And it is an unbelievable election simply because one of the candidates is not anywhere to be seen. And again, we're not taking sides in this show politically on anything. We're not telling you how to vote. We're not telling you who's better. We're not telling you any of that stuff. We're going to talk about politics, but we're not going to take a position that is going to be like all the cable networks and all the news networks where they become all so ideologically based that you really can't sift through all the ideology to get to the facts. We're not going to do that on the show. But clearly, these numbers have to be concerning to the Trump campaign. And I think that when you really look at it, it just gets to a point that, you know, you have to really wonder about our politics in this country now, that everything was pretty much going along very smoothly. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hits, and then the Black Lives Matter situation happens. It's just amazing how quickly the world can turn. And I think that we're living it now, and we're seeing it in real time. It's also interesting that Trump is now challenging Biden to a mental exam. I mean, this is like, back in the old days, what would they have done? Got on horses and jousted each other? I mean, are we going to now have a debate where they have half of the debate is a Jeopardy quiz show? I mean, this is crazy. Now they're challenging each other's mental capacity. I thought when you run for president that we're way past this, that we don't, think about it in those terms, that you've already kind of been cleared as it relates to your mental capacity to do the toughest job in the world. But Donald Trump is now challenging Joe Biden to a mental exam. And I'm just trying to understand, is this really where, our politics have gone? I mean, in some ways it's humorous. I know that people tune into some of that, to be entertained, if you will, in a way, because no one has ever seen anything like this. It's absolutely, something that has never happened before. But everything is on the table this year, in the weirdest election that America has seen in a long, long time. So it'll be interesting. Maybe we could host it on our show. I'll come up with 10 questions, show them pictures, elephants, and we'll figure out, can they distinguish between all of that? But a mental exam challenge, it's really something. Okay. Roll the tape.
Okay, let's dive into the polls. There are some of note because they show a double-digit lead for Joe Biden. So here is NBC, Wall Street Journal, Joe Biden at 51%, Donald Trump at 40%. These are national polls. At Quinnipiac, it's even bigger. Joe Biden 52%, Donald Trump 37%. What do you say?
Yeah, two national polls, both coming out yesterday, both showing double-digit national leads for Joe Biden. It's significant. We're 3.5 months away from the election. It is still a snapshot in time. This is not necessarily what the polls will look like in November, but it shows what a deficit Donald Trump is in right now. And honestly, Allison, I think when you go inside these numbers of what's underneath them, you see how the coronavirus issue and Donald Trump's perceived lack of leadership, perceived failure from the American people.
Now, again, I agree with CNN on just about nothing, okay? And I agree with Fox on almost nothing, just to tell you kind of where I stand. But when you look at those raw numbers and they're actually put in front of you, you really have to come to the conclusion that this is really not a good situation for the president. And I think he's tripling down on the coronavirus, that one day it's just going to go away. I mean, think about what I said at the top of the show, with 85 babies now in Corpus Christi, Texas, that have now contracted the coronavirus. I mean, this is something that is dominating not only the world, but it's dominating the dinner tables, at every dinner table in the United States of America. I mean, somebody has got to understand in the Trump campaign that this is really no joke. And the other side to the equation is they got Biden locked up in a basement. Okay. Now, do I think that's a good strategy? Do I think that that's exactly what needs to happen in terms of just letting the Trump campaign, if you will, self-destruct? I don't think it's good for the country. I don't think it's good that a presidential candidate 100 and some odd days out from the election is locked up in his basement. He's held one press conference in the last 100 days, and I don't think that that's good for the country. I really don't think it's good for the country. But this is the weirdness, again, of this year and the circumstances that we're dealing with. So we're going to keep an eye on these polls, and we're going to see exactly where this goes. Again, where we are today is not necessarily where we're going to end up, but I think it is an indication of people are not happy with the handling of the coronavirus. And if I was advising Donald Trump, I would shift gears on this. I would figure out, what can be done in order to give people confidence that you're not underestimating this. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this whole Portland mess. Roll the tape.
Meantime, continued unrest, the types of which John Lewis was very concerned about in his life, dating back to a young man at a number of freedom rallies and the like. But they continued picking up steam in Portland, where the unrest was so bad. There's been a battle about whether more troops should be there. The mayor of Portland, the governor of Washington have been arguing back and forth that it can cause more harm than good. Mark Morgan is joining us right now, the acting CBP Commissioner, Customs and Border Protection. Commissioner, what do you make of essentially the powers that be in Portland saying, we don't need you, don't want you, we think you're agitating things by pushing troops on us? What do you think?
Neil, it's just outrageous and it's reckless. And the president is right. It's attitudes and policies like that actually beget the violence. Look, the argument that the mere presence of federal officers and agents causes violence, that is outrageous and it's ridiculous. And I believe that most American people do not believe that. What's happening right now are absolute criminals. They are willfully organizing, planning, and coordinating and preparing themselves and bringing weapons to these areas with the intent to destroy federal property and harm federal agents and officers. That is criminal, and that cannot be justified.
So here's the point I'd like to make on this. Violence breeds violence. When people around the country watch what's going on in Portland, and we had the same situation in Seattle. All right. Now let me just read you a couple things about what's going on there. In Portland, people broke into the Portland Police Association office building and lit the building on fire and threw rocks at police. Okay? These aren't peaceful protests. These are not protesters. These are anarchists that don't like our way of life, don't like the country. But let's get back to the real issue here. Violence breeds other violence. So today it's Portland. Where's it going to be tomorrow? Allowing for cities to be taken over by these anarchists and allowing for some of this to occur. I mean, you just really have to ask yourself the question, what's going to happen here? When is all this going to stop? What are they really in? What do they really want? Well, they're not worried about Black Lives Matter. These protesters and criminals are not worried about George Floyd. What they're worried about is they don't like the United States of America. So therefore, they're picking these cities that they think they can cherry pick because of the lack of leadership in some of these cities. And I'm not going to go as far as to go Democrat, Republican, and all that because, we get enough of that out in the mainstream news. But these mayors, this Ted Wheeler, okay, he's the mayor of Portland. He says people are being denied probable cause when they get arrested by the feds. Probable cause. All you got to do is look at the tape. You just look at the tapes of these things and you come to the conclusion very, very quickly that these aren't people that are law-abiding citizens. These are people that hate our system. And they're being supported in a lot of ways by some of the politicians in some of these cities. I've said over and over, and I'm going to keep beating this point. Mayors and city council people and even governors have never been under the stress now that they're under with all of the issues that are confronting America. And when you get from the governor level and you now go down to the county levels and you go down to mayors and you go down to city council people, none of these people are trained to deal with this. I mean, these people are basically get elected and go to rubber chicken dinners. You ever been to a rubber chicken dinner? You know what it is? It's when you go to the Moose Club and they got 300 people and everybody's eating the same piece of chicken that was cooked in a kitchen. I mean, that's what these mayors do. They go out and they give speeches and they go see that, they are just not equipped to be able to handle international crises, which is what the United States is in the middle of. They're just not equipped to be able to handle it. They're not trained to handle it. And quite frankly, you get to a point when it comes to this, is you say to yourself, who really is equipped to handle it? It seems like a lot of our federal people are not really equipped to be able to handle some of this. But when you get down to the local level, it becomes, even worse. So we're going to talk a little bit about that also with our guest today, and we'll get her viewpoint as it relates to some of this. But the Portland situation is just another situation that's out of control. The feds have a right to be able to go in there if things are not being handled by the local authorities. I'm not taking a political position there. I just think it's commonsensical that if people are rioting and they're criminals and they're lighting buildings on fire and they're destroying a city, that they should be arrested. You can't just sit back and send, a counselor to go talk to them. That's just not the way this works. Okay. So our next segment, which I promised we would continue to handle, and this will not be a very long segment, but it's a segment on Chicago. Okay? I told you that Chicago was one of the lost stories in the United States, that this has been going on for so long that people are just numb to what's going on in the United States' third largest city. Okay? But it's now really digressed over the weekend into name calling and other things, which doesn't give people a sense that their elected officials really care about fixing the problem. Roll the tape.
I've listed for you the names of these kids who have died across this country. It is unacceptable. And under this president, he'll take action. And the derelict mayor of Chicago should step up and ask for federal help because she's doing a very poor job at securing her streets.
White House press secretary there, Kayleigh McEnany, calling out the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, over rising gun violence in her city. Mayor Lightfoot responding harshly to the criticism with a tweet saying, quote, "Hey, Karen, watch your mouth."
Okay. So let me try to explain this to everybody in case, nobody was paying attention over the weekend. The press secretary for President Trump calls the mayor of Chicago a name. Okay? Just petty, just no reason for it. If you don't like the fact in Chicago that they had 60 shootings over this last weekend, 10 more people dead, then just talk about that. But now, representing the president of the United States, you now got to call the mayor of Chicago a name. And now the mayor of Chicago feels that she now can fire back and call the press secretary a name. Now, this Karen term is kind of going around between African-American women and white women, okay? This is one of the most ridiculous, childish situations in the midst of an incredible mess that I can think of. This is where our politics have gone. This is the hate. Remember what Dr. Martin Luther King told John Lewis. You can't hate, because the second that you do that, you accomplish nothing. I mean, we need to learn from these people who came through the 60s and 70s. And John Lewis, well into, his whole career, 33 years as a congressperson, in the House of Representatives. I mean, we got to learn from this. We got people calling each other names now. I mean, I'd hate to think what would happen now if now white women come up with a term for African American women. I mean, this has just gotten out of control. It's out of control. And both sides, again, both sides are guilty. This is just ridiculous. 60 people shot, 10 people dead. Isn't that the story? Isn't that really what, as Americans, we need to really sit down and talk about? And I'll get back to the same thing that I bring up every single time on this issue, is that this needs to be a major part incorporated into the Black Lives Matter movement that some would like to indicate and say is only around police brutality towards African Americans. I think it's got to be expanded. There's got to be a coalition that comes together that ultimately figures out how you can get in the middle here and try to get some change. But you're not going to get there with the press secretary and the mayor of Chicago. I mean, it's ridiculous. And to be honest with you, the press secretary for Donald Trump, she started it at the press conference. I mean, there's no reason to call out the mayor in the way that she did that. Do you have a problem with the mayor's politics? Do you have a problem with the shooting? Say it. But we can't go to these petty levels, because you know what ends up happening? When we see our elected officials doing it, everybody thinks it's okay. Guess what? It's not okay. It's childish. Okay. And then the last segment before we have our guest on is the Trump interview with Chris Wallace. I'd like to play the segment, and then I want to tell you what I really think is going on here. Run the tape.
But when you talk about mortality rates, I think it's the opposite. I think we have one of the lowest mortality rates in the world.
We're going to take a look. We had 900 deaths on a single day.
We will take a look.
This week.
Ready?
You can check it out.
Could you please get me the mortality rate?
Yeah.
Kaylee's right here. I heard we had one of the lowest, maybe the lowest mortality rate anywhere in the world. Do you have the numbers, please? Because I heard we had the best mortality rate.
The case rate of similarly situated countries, as Dr. Burks points out, and this is
number one low mortality rate. I hope you show the scenario because it shows what fake news is all about. Okay,
I don't think I'm fake news, but we'll put we'll put our stats on.
You said we had the worst mortality rate in the world, and we have the best.
All right, it's a little complicated, but bear with us. We went with numbers from Johns Hopkins University, which charted the mortality rate for 20 countries hit by the virus. The U.S. ranked 7th, better than the United Kingdom, but worse than Brazil and Russia. The White House went with this chart from the European CDC, which shows Italy and Spain doing worse, but countries like Brazil and South Korea doing better. Other countries doing better, like Russia, aren't included in the White House chart.
Okay. So now, are you confused enough now based on just watching a 1-minute clip? You know, we've got surveys and reports from everywhere. They say completely different things as it relates to all of this. And we've got an interview with the President of the United States where he feels he's got to have people on hand that can hand him information because he's going to get trapped by the way that the reporter is asking the questions. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, in a way, I felt for Donald Trump yesterday in that interview. Now, some of the things that he said, he tripled down again on the coronavirus. It will go away one day and all that. I disagree with that. I think that's wrong, and I think that it's not smart politics. But, you know, this guy has been under siege from the media. Now you've got Chris Wallace from Fox News. They're all the same, you know, just trying to get you with that gotcha moment. He's got to have all the stuff instead of really asking Trump about explaining his strategy and what is your strategy. It's all the gotcha stuff. And then he held up, we didn't even show it, a picture of a mental exam, if you will. That's all I can call it, a mental exam. It's got a picture of an elephant on it. And I'm saying to myself, what the hell is going on here? You know, we are the greatest country on the planet, but we're acting like a bunch of children as it relates to how we're going about these things. Here's what I think, and I'll end the monologue with this. Donald Trump is incredibly bitter that 6 to 8 months ago, he did a tremendous job, okay? I'm a businessman. He did a tremendous job on the economy of the United States, on trade deals in the United States, and on getting rid of unnecessary regulations. That is what fueled the economy, even more than the tax cuts. That fueled the economy. In his mind, as he sat back, I think he thought about, if I can put people to work, there's no better gift that I can give to minorities, African Americans, etc., than to put them to work and have them put food on the table for their family. I believe that's what he thought. The bottom line is, though, his table manners are so bad sometimes, and he says certain things that he shouldn't say, that pretty much make the world cringe, that he gets himself into a position where he takes a position and then he doubles down and then he triples down. And what I think has happened here is a guy that did what I consider to be an incredible job on the things that I just mentioned has failed in some other areas as it relates to race relations in this country. I believe, again, he believed that he was in a situation that if he put people back to work, that was the key to all this. But what he didn't really understand is you can't call people names. You can't seem insensitive when it comes to certain issues. And the most important thing is you got to be president to all the people, whether they voted for you or not. I think those things capsulize his frustration. But he seems like an incredibly frustrated man that had the rug pulled out from underneath him with the coronavirus, which came from China, and we've covered that over and over and over. And then the Black Lives Matter movement that, quite frankly, probably the Trump administration didn't quite handle the way that, maybe some people thought they should have handled it. I thought it was a bit insensitive. And if you talk to African Americans, they will tell you it was grossly insensitive. So that's the issue that you deal with when you talk about President Trump. But what you saw just in that clip is another moment of gotcha journalism. That's what the whole journalism profession has now come to. Let's get somebody. Let's really pull a chart out that no one's seen, and how do you explain this, and what is this? And now Donald Trump has become so wise to it, if you will. He's got his own people with charts, and now we're arguing about what chart is which. It's just unbelievable. So that's one of the reasons we decided to do this show, because we're going to keep the politics out. But the long and short of it is, that's the world at this moment that we live in an election year. And I said, buckle up. The worst is yet to come between now and November 3rd. The worst is yet to come. Okay, so let's go to our guest, the CEO of Crime Stoppers in Houston. She's been involved in national forums, both on television and on the internet, as it relates to social justice issues and other issues that confront our country. We're really fortunate to have Rania on the show. Rania, are you there? Hello? I think we lost your audio, Rania.
We'll come back to it.
We'll come right back to you. So anyways, what our guest is really going to talk about today is really going to be about, how do you bridge the gap between policing and where certain people in the country really think that policing should stop and other social justice things should then take over. You read a lot about they want to defund the police. That's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. But there is some redirection of some funds about nonviolent crimes that ultimately some people that are proponents of that structure really want to sit down and talk about. And I think at least there should be a debate about it. And I think our guest today is highly qualified, to be able to really talk about that. And so we're really working on trying to figure out how that all comes together. Do we have our guest back? Okay, so let's go on to another topic. Sports in this country is really at a standstill right now. You go on the television yesterday, which was great, is we actually had a situation where you had live golf on, any fans. It was great. It's nice to turn on the television, sit in your favorite chair, and actually spend 3 hours doing something else than doing a puzzle. All right, we have Rania back. Rania, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, here we are. Now, I'm really sorry about mispronouncing your name at the top of the show. I practiced it. I had it written out phonetically. Can you say your last name for everybody?
It's the worst, and I apologize, but it's Runya Mankarious.
Mankarious. That's not that hard. And like I said, that sounds of Greek origin, but we talked before the show that it's really of Egyptian origin.
Yes, it's a Coptic Orthodox name, and a lot of people think that it's Greek, and I take it all because I think both would be wonderful.
Well, let me tell you, they're all great. So
Yeah.
you come from good stock, Rania. So tell people a little bit about your background. Tell our viewing audience a little bit about your background and what the Crime Stoppers in Houston is really all about.
I'm going to, but I have to first say I listened to every word of your opening monologue, and I've never felt both terrified, completely on the same page. I laughed a little bit, and I really took some moments to think and pause. So I really appreciate the way you just packaged all of that. It was fantastic. Yeah, I am the proud leader, CEO of Crime Stoppers of Houston. I am a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. I'm an attorney, and I grew up in the Northeast in Boston, Massachusetts. My husband brought me to Houston, Texas, and all I wanted to do was serve the community. And I was introduced to this nonprofit, Crime Stoppers of Houston, in 2006. And I simply fell in love with the mission, which is to solve and prevent crime in partnerships with citizens, media, and law enforcement. I really saw it as a unique way to get citizens involved in public safety. And it's actually an area not a lot of people think about. You think public safety is up to the police department. They take care of that. And our whole thing is, yes, of course our law enforcement partners do that, but we have a job to play. We have a role in this equation as well. And so now we find ourselves boots on the ground. We're in schools. We've reached 1.3 million kids on cyber safety, not talking about bringing weapons to schools, on human trafficking, but we're also in the communities, and we talk about everything from domestic violence to home invasions, bank robberies, relationships with law enforcement. I mean, we literally cover it all, and have been doing so for many, many, many years. So now this year has been unlike any other year we've ever seen, and the calls to our organization have just increased exponentially, whether we're dealing with bail reform, which is where we started the year, to COVID scams, which is where we spent a lot of time, to the horrific killing of George Floyd and what it meant and what it means for law enforcement communities, and to, of course, the defund police narrative. We've literally never been as busy as we are now.
So talk about the defund police initiative that's out there. I am against defunding the police because I think they play an important role in our minority communities, somewhat even more than what they play in our suburban communities. But I think the redirection of some funds that can be redirected to a social network, social worker network, if you will, on nonviolent issues might be something that's worth talking about. And you say?
I agree and disagree. So I think the defund police narrative never really was defined to begin with. So what happened was the words defund literally mean to remove funds. And a lot of people took that and ran with it, got very, very agitated, got very, very loud, were very, very demonstrative in their protests, creating damage for some cities. And as a result of that, you saw city councils, and it's interesting, your point in your opening was interesting when you said, are city councils even really equipped, local city government, are they really even equipped to deal with what they're dealing with? That was a very interesting point. But the response of the momentum of the defund police narrative, the heat that followed it, caused some local city councils to actually go ahead and defund police. Now, I deal with citizens every day that say, look, nobody actually meant defund the police. We meant reform the police. Okay, great. We actually all agree. Police unions also agree that law enforcement agencies need to be reformed. But we don't want to approach this in a punitive manner. Listen, we don't agree with what law enforcement's doing. We're going to punish you, and we're going to remove dollars from you, and we're going to go ahead and give it to another organization. What we need to be saying is we need to reform law enforcement. And guys, You're going to hate what's coming next, but that might mean to even invest a little bit more in law enforcement. Look at their training. Look at how their cadets are being recruited. Look at how officers are being continually trained and retained in law enforcement, the practices that they need to use, partnerships that need to be expanded. So it's not a defund question, it's a reform question, while we, completely separate issue, increase funding for these social justice issues, whether it's mental health, jobs for inner city communities, schooling for inner city youth, areas of need, health insurance, home environment. Those are all things we need to look at, but they're not mutually exclusive. We need to be dealing with multiple issues at the same time, and I believe we are smart enough to do it. I also believe that a majority of us agree on these issues. We reference the polls, you've referenced the polls, of course, talking about President Trump and Joe Biden. I think it's interesting to make the point that these sample sizes are 900 people in some polls, 1,000 people in other polls. There are 153 million registered voters in this country. These polls do not always represent the ideas of the masses. I think more of us agree on the defund the police issue, on the reforming the police issue, on investing in social services, but these sort of loud, really extreme pockets are what's really sucking up all the air in the room and taking all of the media attention.
Well, I'll tell you, I have picked on the mayor of New York pretty regularly on this show. And I picked on him for a very specific reason, is that he's using the defunding of the police as a political weapon. And he's playing to what I consider to be a group that ultimately he is trying to make sure that his base stays intact. And he's using the police, in my view, the way that he should not be using the police in the defunding. He took $1 billion out of their budget. And I covered that extensively on prior shows. And I'm against it. And the way that he's handled it, I'm against. When we talk now about, though, what you just talked about, systemic problems in the communities, Chicago's the best example of that I can come up with. And I'm handling a Chicago segment almost every show because I think it's the forgotten piece. I really believe that it's the forgotten piece. I mean, Barack Obama cared deeply about, forget your politics, whatever it is. We don't take political positions on the show. He cared deeply about Chicago, and he really couldn't turn it around there. The systemic problem in the west side of Chicago and the south side of Chicago are real problems of employment and education and all the things that I know that you talk about. But until you fix that, you're not going to be able to fix anything. And so I would concur exactly with what you just said.
And you make such a valid point. And it's another issue people have to look at. To wake up tomorrow and say, look, we're going to just cut $1 billion out of the New York Police Department, and then we're going to start fixing social issues. Or you look at Chicago and follow the same model. They were looking at numbers around $153 million cut. That's absolutely the wrong process. These are things that take time. It is going to take time to reform our law enforcement, but it's also going to take time to invest in these communities. It's going to take generations to change things, to invest and see successes in schools, and not that long in terms of seeing successes in schools. But we've got to start doing the work, making it apolitical. People are getting tired and of the politics, which is why everything you're saying is so valuable. We are getting tired of the politics because you know who is suffering the most? It is the average citizens just waking up every day saying, how do I provide for my family? How do I try to live a meaningful life and go to sleep and wake up again and do it all over again? Kids who do want to go to school, who want to make something of themselves, who are starting to see more role models in the community, in different genres, in athletics, in music, in business, in politics, in news, in film, in theater. We all are actually now seeing people that look exactly like us succeeding across the board in every area. Let's invest in our kids wherever they are. Give them the tools that they need. It doesn't follow, though, that that's going to happen overnight and as a direct result of taking money out of law enforcement. What happens when you defund the police or you break sort of the backbone of law enforcement in these communities is a direct increase in crime when it comes to areas of need. And I'll also add that in Houston specifically, I'll talk to people across this country and they'll make the argument that, it's not right. You have law enforcement going into communities. They don't look like the people in those communities. And, some of us are getting even tired of that argument because you look at cities like Houston, we're a minority majority. And our officers do look like the communities they serve. Our officers are from the communities that they serve. And there are a lot of cities that are like Houston that have unbelievable diversity in their law enforcement partners, and that where the officers were literally born out of those communities that they care of and want to do the best for.
Right. Let me ask you a question. Does the Black Lives Matter movement suffer when those inside the movement decide that this is only about police brutality against African Americans in the communities? Do they suffer does the movement suffer when they don't become more inclusive with things like Chicago, with the situation in New York, with some of the situations around the country? Does the movement suffer? I've taken a position, Rania, on this show that it does suffer because I think that there's got to be a coalition that's built far beyond the African American community in order to figure out how we get change. Because I'm a firm believer, and I'd like for you to address this as well, there is systemic racism in our country. There is systemic racism. There's so many people that, we're not a racist country. I didn't say we were a racist country. I said there is, in certain communities, there's systemic racism, and it's been there for a long time. So speak to that, because I think our viewers are really interested in your viewpoint on those 2 points.
I think, and I'll start with the latter, certainly there's systemic racism, and I don't know many people that say it doesn't exist. On the flip side, we are also at a point in our country's history and narrative where a majority of us can recognize that and say we want no part in it. And we want to ensure that there are tools, there are opportunities, there are avenues for all to succeed. The idea of systemic racism exists, but in my opinion and in my hope, it is a minority held position in the sense that the majority of us in thriving areas and well-educated parts of this country believe all have a voice, all have a role to play. I mean, I look at city councils across this country, and Houston's an incredible example. Our Mayor Sylvester Turner. You look at our police chief, Art Acevedo. You look at our sheriff, Ed Gonzalez. You look at our city council, our county commissioner, Lena Hidalgo. We've moved past. We're a community that's recognized systemic racism has existed, and we have said not here, and we've moved past it, and we've done everything we can to ensure that people of all walks, of all colors, coming from all backgrounds can succeed. And I think of myself as an example, as proof of that. To your former point about Black Lives Matter, I think it is very, very complicated. What the Black Lives Matter movement has done is incredibly inspiring in the sense that they took hold of a message, they wrapped it around our emotion, and they pushed it out from cover to cover, corner to corner, north, south, east, west. I was driving through rural parts of Massachusetts and communities, that actually do not even represent communities of color. They are communities, that historically for me are really sad in the sense that you don't see a lot of different ethnicities. And I noticed that every single house had a Black Lives Matter banner right by the driveway. And I thought, this is so interesting. These are not even communities that you see different colors in these communities. You don't, but yet Black Lives Matter, the message had reached every it was unbelievable. On the flip side, when the movement focuses just on defunding the police, or maybe punitizing police, or saying that the evils of this country rest solely on the shoulders of law enforcement, most people will say, well, that's not true. But most people aren't stopping to actually really look at it either. And they'll say, well, Black Lives Matter, of course they're working on, what's happening, the increases in crime in Chicago. Of course they're doing a lot to address the increase in crimes in New York or Houston or LA. And, there has to be questions about what they are doing there. And that's one that we want to challenge people to look at. This is an incredible time in our country. We want everybody to be represented. We've got to keep communities safe, especially children, especially communities in need, and especially when we're going to target the law enforcement line that, like it or not, was actually really working hard to keep these communities safe.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, I've never accomplished, I've said this on my show, I've never accomplished anything where people didn't meet in the middle and try to figure out how to work and solve a problem. You're lucky in the city of Houston. Your police chief, Art Acevedo, is one of the coolest guys I ever sat down with. I was on a show on PBS years ago, and we were in the green room, he and I, and we spent about 2 hours. The show got delayed for some reason, and we were drinking coffee, but he is a wonderful, wonderful guy. And if every city, every major city had a police chief like Art, the world would be much better off. Let me close with this. Let me close with an idea, and you can comment on this, is that all the talk about what we're doing with Black Lives Matter, you just mentioned it, and you're saying that it's crossing over into suburban areas and other things. But there's got to be a coalition in my mind that comes together that ultimately then figures out where are we now going to create the change? How are we going to create the change? And it's not going to happen by certain leaders of Black Lives Matter saying that, well, if we don't get what we want, we're going to burn the system down. That's not going to be helpful. That's the same thing as what I was pointing out with Kayleigh McEnany and the mayor of Chicago calling each other names. We're not going to get anywhere by doing this. And I don't know why we've gotten to this point, but we're at this point where it just is hate, and it's politics, and it's all these things. But your view in closing on what needs to be the next step on Black Lives Matter?
Well, I think the next step is for everybody to say, look, we're willing to put down our pitchforks. We're willing to put down our grenades, if you will, and we are willing to come to the table. We are in a climate now where if you even say the word Trump, you're going to have elected officials calling for massive boycotts. Or if you say the word Biden, it's, as you said, people are going to be questioning your, not just his, but your own mental wellness. I mean, we've just gone way overboard. People are dying. Cities are being ruined. Kids are suffering. Businesses are closing. I mean, there's a lot going on in our nation right now. Law enforcement morale is the lowest it's ever been as crime skyrockets. We've got to sit down and say, what are solutions? What are we willing to do to work together, period. I'll tell you why I love the work we do. That's what we've been doing for 40 years. We say, we are going to work with you. We're going to study. We're going to figure out a solution. We're going to apply it. And it's so unique. I use this one example. There have been school shootings after school shootings after school shootings in this country. Houston has had our organization, Crime Stoppers of Houston Safe School Institute, in the school since 1997, well before it was a national hot topic. School safety was a hot topic. We worked creatively. We said, we'll talk to the kids. We're talking to the teachers. We're talking to the parents. We're talking to community members. We are in the schools, boots on the ground, listening, studying. What games are you guys on? What social media trends are there? What is the latest challenge? What are the mental health issues? We're looking at all of it. And to date, we have spoken to over 1.3 million kids just in Harris County, and we've proactively removed almost 300 weapons before they could ever be used against a student.
That's an unbelievable stat. Unbelievable statistic right there. It sums up everything that we're talking about, Rania. That That statistic right there. Get the guns. Let's get the guns. Let's get the harmful scenarios that are out there, and let's do everything we can to mitigate. How can my audience follow you? They follow you at Crime Stoppers of Houston. Is that how they follow you?
So I'm on social media under @the Runya Report, only because Mankarious is a disaster. So it's
No, I love
@the
it,
Runya
Mankarious. I can say it now. I'm never going to screw it up again, ever in my life. I'm going to think about Mankarious now the whole day. It's perfect.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, @the Runya Report for me, and then Crime Stoppers is @Crime Stoppers Houston.
All right. Well, make sure you let your audience know.
crime-stoppers.org.
That's great. Well, make sure that you let your audience know that we exist here, and we'll do the same. And we'd love to have you on again. Enjoy your time up in Boston. I know you're in Boston now, so enjoy your time up there, and go down to the North End and eat a good Italian meal.
You got it. I'll do it for you, Frank. Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Okay, so that's our show for today. We're happy to be here, and hopefully you'll tell your friends and colleagues and family members to be a part of the 2B Frank Show. You can follow us at the 2B Frank Show on YouTube, 2B Frank Show on Twitter, 2B Frank Show on LinkedIn, and 2B Frank Show on Facebook. Until Thursday, we're signing off from Dallas, Texas. Great to be with you. Keep your family safe, and God bless.